Today's headlines. Heavy flooding in northwestern Tigray on Saturday kills 10 people, as many remain missing. Chief of Staff of Ethiopia's National Defense Forces says Ethiopia more than ready for war with Tigray. "150 ethnic Amhara civilians killed in Qalam Wallagga days after Ethiopian forces claim they have regained the area." Hello and welcome viewers watching our news live on your television screens and on our social media platforms, YouTube and Facebook. I'm Tigray Tigrai and I'll be reading the news for the hour. Stay tuned. And now the details. At least 10 people dead and many missing in Salakhlecha in northwestern Tigray due to flooding in the area on Saturday. Officials say the impact of the flood were even more catastrophic due to the fact that Saturdays are a market day in the small village town. Number of casualties is expected to rise as the search for missing persons continues. Reports also indicated that flooding caused damage to property, with multiple houses and commercial places out of use and livestock dead. Deaths and lifelong injuries are also expected to be exacerbated by the failure of Tigray's health system that has been a target of deliberate and systematic destruction on its infrastructures and further weakened by blockade on the delivery of life-saving medical supplies by the Ethiopian government.
زقاطم العلت 18 خباب 10 فرقان جمير تلعيلو زخم زي عند مساله غاشا وحج ያው ከተማ ሳላኻ ይኹን ኣብ ወረዳና ኣጋጢመ ይፈልጥ ማዓልቱ ቀዳም ስለ ዝነበረ ያው ዝመፀ ህዝቢ ብዙሕ እዩ ኣብዚ ከባቢ እዚ ከም ትሪእዎ ዘለኹም ዝረዋዚ ሞሊስ ንብኽልቲ ጫፍ ብኽልቲ ወሰን ዘሎ ነባሪ ከተማ ሳላኻ ያው ጥልቕሊቕ የተገዛውት ማለት እዩ ኣብዚ ሰፊሕ ገዛውቲ ንብረቶም እኽሎም ብምሉ ያው ካብ ጥቕሚ ወፃ ኮይኑ እዚ ተፈራረሰ ገዛውን ስለ ዘለልቲ ስለቲ ኮንቴነሩን ከም ዘለዎ የልዕል ወሲድዎ ኣብኡ ዝነበረ ሰብ እውን ተወሲዱ ጋና ምላእ ይዝርከብ ኣብዚ ተወሰነ ታራማ እዩ ነይሩ እምበር ሳዕ ዘሰጋዕ ይነበርኩም ናይ ወትሪ ሙሲና ንሕና እውን ዳህሮም ሰዓተዋ ንሕና እውን ሃለና ዘምልጥ ኣመሲልዎና ኣብዚ ከይሰግራብ እውን ትማይ መዲኡ በይ ሓልፋ ዘምልጥ ኣመሲልዎና ቆርቆሮ ወፅየን በሲዐን ዓሊ በሲዐን 4-5 ወልዑ ወንክይዱ ኣብ ቅድሚ ዓይነይ ርእየታ ኣብ ቅድሚ ዓይነይ ሸለውላ ኸይዳ بعيني لولا غير أنا أخواتك كتملت تملت أوش تملت تقول أتايد اللي يتحيد وغير ده 3-4 وضعية أنت أتعطني فلت كون إذا تيدا دودي ونا عبي أخو حيد خم دقيقة تحقيقه بوصية خير يتخيل وصية الله ده إحنا نقدي أيه نسقني بارك تبوت قرو توصية الله إيه نزبزيني جن أبدي نبرهد بيه تفتول الإسران حمشتن سبب تي قرقرة عاصي تخمي لو تسا قرقرة تفير زخدا سبب أنا حيش لأن الإسران حمشتن سبب نيريو أعوذ وصدوذ نهزيد نبرة تنتاكنوا لنا ناي نبرة منو وصلن هو تراي نصاين عندلي كم تراي
On Monday, Tigray External Affairs Office issued a statement regarding the mass detention of Tigrayans in various parts of the country and made a call to the international community to press the regime in Addis Ababa to comply with the international laws and principles. The office also denounced a recent statement by the Ethiopian Human Rights Commission saying the statement was issued to mask the systematic campaign against Tigrayans and make it appear like an isolated incident. Abel Tzigabo has more.
Tigray External Affairs Office issued a statement on Monday regarding the ongoing mass detention of Tigrayans in different parts of Ethiopia and said it is part of a systematic campaign against Tigrayans. The office denounced a statement by Ethiopian Human Rights Commission on the 29th of June 2022 condemning the inhuman detention of 8,560 innocent Tigrayans in Samar Afar, saying the statement was issued to mask the overall systematic campaign against Tigrayans as an isolated act of rights violation and said the institution is an appendage of the Ethiopian state that was complicit in legitimizing the atrocities committed inflicted on the people of Tigray. The statement recalled that the regime in Addis has detained active and retired members of the Ethiopian National Defense Forces at the onset of the war, with some of them murdered and others dying under suspicious circumstances. The statement has also indicated that the Ethiopian government has forcibly repatriated Tigrayan refugees and migrants from Middle East and is holding them as prisoners in concentration camps across the country. The government of Tigray called on the international community to press the Ethiopian government to abide by domestic and international laws and release the tens of thousands of Tigrayans languishing in concentration camps all over the country.
In a bizarre turn of events, Chief of Staff of Ethiopia's National Defense Forces made a statement on Saturday saying that his forces are more ready than ever to fight Tigray's armed forces. This comes just days after the Ethiopian government announced the establishment of a committee led by Ethiopia's Deputy Prime Minister to oversee negotiation process with Tigray. Last week, Ethiopian ministries had made several statements that made unsubstantiated claims in regards to Tigrayan government and its ruling party. Member of Tigray's Central Command, Getachew Reda, in a press briefing on Friday, had said that Ethiopian authorities were sending mixed messages and needed to take serious measures to demonstrate their commitment to peace. Again, Avel Tzigav reports.
Chief of Staff of Ethiopia's National Defense Forces, Field Marshal Birhanu Jula, attended an event organized by A's Division of Ethiopia's Army and said his forces were more ready than ever to fight Tigray armed forces.
TPLF only likes to talk about its victories, while it's actually being defeated on the battleground. It tried everything to come to the center. After a lot of celebration, it found itself back in Mekelle. They don't talk about their loss. It must be noted that we are more prepared to fight them than they can ever be to fight us.
Afar Regional State President Haji Awel Arba also attended the occasion and made repeated references to snakes and the need for their eradication.
It may be difficult to hit the snake on the head at first, but the main goal is to break its bone, and we were able to do that in Harbo. The junta should know that they will face a great loss if they should fight us.
The statement by Field Marshal Birhanu Jula comes as a surprise in light of recent developments that have seen Ethiopian government officials, including the Prime Minister, discuss their readiness for peace talks, and last week established a team expected to lead negotiations with the government of Tigray. Although days earlier, Ethiopian ministries had issued multiple statements that accused the government of Tigray and its ruling party of colluding with others to perpetuate violence against civilians without presenting any evidence. In a press briefing on Friday, government spokesperson Getachew Reda said that the government of Tigray was caught off guard by the statement that have led his government to question the sincerity of the Ethiopian government toward peace efforts.
ሰላም ድሉ ዝብል ወገን ናይ ሰላም ድሌቱ ኣናውንስ ዝገበረሉ መዓልቲ መስለኒ ድሕሪኡ ስዕቦም ዘለዉ ግዜያት ዘውጾም መግለጽታት ከም መንግስቲ ዘውጾም መግለጽታት
Days after announcing it is ready for peace talks, we have contradictory statements coming out from the Ethiopian government. This makes you wonder if there are really any sincere efforts towards peace. There is a coordinated media campaign against the government and the people of Tigray, an intense smear campaign by the government of Ethiopia. It's trying to link every unrest in Ethiopia to the TPLF and the government like it used to before the truce. We don't believe that a force committed to ending this war through negotiation would dedicate so much of its time on fabricating such propaganda.
150 ethnic Amhara civilians said to have been killed in Kalam Wallagga in Western Oromia on Monday. This comes just days after Ethiopian forces claimed to have taken back multiple areas in Western Oromia, including the Kalam district. According to eyewitnesses, the attack started at dawn and lasted well into the morning. Hours later, the Ethiopian government discontinued phone communication, making it difficult for journalists and human rights groups to gather information on what exactly unfolded in the area. Abiy Ahmed was the first to announce the attack on his Twitter account, blaming the attack on the Oromo Liberation Army, despite his government claiming it had regained the area from OLA last week. Announcing through government spokesperson Legesse Tulu just 4 days ahead of the massacre, the Ethiopian government said it had been able to liberate the area through a joint military operation by Ethiopia's National Defense Forces, the Federal Police, and Oromia Regional Forces. The massacre follows a killing spree on June 18 that took the lives of more than 200 people in the Oromia region's Tole area. The Oromia region and other parts of Ethiopia have seen an increase in violence and attack on civilians as the Ethiopian government continues fighting with multiple armed groups under claims of law enforcement. Displaced persons across Tigray have been victims of many atrocities. They were forced to leave their homes and their family members behind in hopes of finding refuge in the IDP camps. But the continuing siege on Tigray has meant that their suffering were only just beginning. We spoke to a young girl sheltered in an IDP camp in Shira Ndasilase. She told us about the difficult journey for her baby brother and visually impaired father, and says today, even miles away from the enemies that had forced them to leave their homes, her and her families are finding it difficult to fulfill even their most basic needs. Sarah Kalali has the details.
This is Azmara Tigrai. She is sheltering in an IDP camp in Shira with her little brother and father. When the war began, she was displaced from her hometown in the district of Tsagade, forced to flee with her father, who suffers from visual impairment as well as a leg injury, and her younger brother. Azmara says the journey to Shira was testing for her and her family.
They told us to go past the Tigray River. Everyone had left us behind. My father is blind, but there was no one to help us. I was all alone. My siblings had left ahead of us, so I just followed other people that were fleeing, but we became separated with them as well. After some time, my father asked me if we were still with the group or if we had become separated. I told him we had. He then said to leave him under a shade somewhere and run to catch up with them. I told him I'd rather die than leave him behind.
Azmara, even over a year later, is caring for her father and her brother alone. Sometimes, she says they both get sick at the same time and she is forced to leave one of them behind while she takes the other to the hospital.
One time, my brother and father were sick at the same time. My father passed out due to hunger. When he fainted, I took him to the hospital. The hospital didn't have any medicine, so they weren't able to help me. I told them I went through a lot of trouble to get him here, and I couldn't bear the thought of him dying after we had finally reached safety. And my brother, his whole body itches and bleeds. The doctors told me it was due to lack of food, and that because of the siege. There was nothing they could do to help him either. They sometimes ask for food and give me what they can find, but I really can't take it anymore.
Azmara and her father would return to the shelter to find an empty home that day, with nothing to eat and very little hope.
After we came back from the hospital, there was nothing to eat here, and the child doesn't know anything, so he keeps asking me to buy things for him, but I don't have anything.
Forced to become the sole caretaker of her family, with no work and no means of income, Azmara says she has become desperate and has started to beg to feed her family.
My brother is sick and bedridden, and my father, I sit him down somewhere where he can wait for me until I come back. He doesn't move or anything, and I go out to the city and beg. People tell me I shouldn't be, while so young.
Azmara's story is that of millions of others across Tigray, who, after losing their homes to a devastating ethnic cleansing campaign, are being denied access to vital services and humanitarian assistance.
Our reporter Winta Kidana met with Tesfai Wildemke Al-Haftu, a 60-year-old man sheltered in an IDP camp in Maqala. Tesfai was a resident of Rawan in western Tigray. He says he first tried to leave the area in 2020, but Ethiopian forces would force him back only to torture, arrest, and beat him in his hometown. He was eventually able to leave in November of 2021 when Amhara forces called all Tigrayan residents to a meeting, arrested them, loaded them onto a truck, and left them on the banks of the Tigray River. Let's take a look.
Tesfai Wildemke Al-Haftu is 68 years old and is amongst the tens of thousands of IDPs sheltered in Sawakari IDP camp. He is from Rawan in Afta Hamura of western Tigray. Him and his family initially fled the area in November of 2020 after Fano, an irregular armed group from the Amhara region, started to kill, torture, and arbitrarily detain Tigrayans. Him and his family had managed to make it as far as Adigoshu when Ethiopian forces would catch up with him and forcibly return him to Humera.
Fano entered Hamara on November 10th of last year. They were beating, torturing, and detaining Tigrayans. We ran away to Adigoshu, where Ethiopian National Defense Forces caught up with us. They beat us and returned us back. Soon after we arrived to Rawan, the Fano started to beat and torture us. They would use sticks with rough edges on our neck to press us against the floor. They would take our property, our money. They would call us junta, weed, TPLF cancer, and more. And we couldn't do anything.
After Ethiopian forces returned him to Rawan, Tesfai says he wasn't able to leave for close to a year. For all that period, he tells us there was no regular administration and the Fano would beat, kill or steal from Tigrayans as they wished.
They did as they pleased. They stole what they wanted. If one member of the Fano didn't so much as like how he would look at him, he would just take you to a valley and kill you. They have no mercy, and there was no one to hold them accountable. We just prayed that we do not fall at their hand.
Tesfai says a year later, on November 25, Tigrayans in the community were called to a meeting. After they all gathered, the Amhara forces would arrest them. The following day, they were loaded onto trucks and taken to Takaza River east of Rawan.
They killed many on our way to Takaza. They also took everything they could find on us. The worst part was that they wouldn't allow us to bury the bodies. Many women, priests, and children were beaten by dogs and hyenas.
After managing to cross the Takaza River, Tesfai and his neighbors would go to the Debit. Once they arrived, they were divided into two groups. One would stay in the IDP camp in the Debit, and the other group that included Tesfai himself would go to Hizat. Just a few months later, a deadly airstrike by Ethiopian forces would take the lives of dozens of IDPs. Tesfai, due to the communications blackout, cannot communicate with his neighbors, but wonders about their well-being.
We stayed in the IDP camp in Dedebit for 7 days before they divided us into two. We were taken to Hizat. The rest stayed there, and they were there when the airstrike took place later.
Tesfai would stay in the IDP camp in Hizat for 4 months. For much of that time, Tesfai says there was very little to eat.
In Hizat, we stayed in a camp built for Eritrean soldiers. I stayed there for 4 months. We hadn't brought anything with us from home, and there wasn't enough food there. When we could no longer take the hunger, we decided to come to Maqala. We arrived here on March 27th of 2020.
After his long and gruesome travel to Maqala, Tesfai is still yet to access to most items like food or medication.
Back home I was healthy. In Hizat, we were trying to build a shelter, and a piece of wood fell on my eye. My vision is now blurry. If I had access to medication, I think I would have been okay, but I don't. They can only give me droplets, and they are not of much help.
The rainy season, according to Tesfai, is likely to bring its more trouble. The tents housing the IDPs at the camp are fragile and are sure to collapse soon.
It's clay soil beneath us. When it rains and the wind can easily blow away the plastic rooms. This is a big problem. These plastic rooms were built to house human beings. They are not strong enough. They have already started to collapse. The world has known what is unfolding in Tigray, but what I can't understand is why they would do anything. We've been crying for help for 2 years now, and there's no one to help us.
For much of the conflict, IDPs like Tesfai, who were forcibly removed from their homes in western Tigray, have seen the brunt of the humanitarian crisis. And while the world has many times overexpressed concern about the humanitarian situation, and especially the ethnic cleansing campaign in western Tigray, it is yet to take any decisive action to bring it to an end, and require that international humanitarian is respected.
The war on Tigray, like all communities everywhere, has severely affected the living conditions of Eritrean refugees who would come to Tigray with the hopes of starting a new life. For decades, Eritreans forced into indefinite national services and living under threat of torture, imprisonment, and little access to education and healthcare have left their homes in search of security, and many had chosen Tigray as their place of refuge. Our reporters spoke with Abraham Gabrehannes, an Eritrean refugee living in El Shaddai, a local charity organization that is housing hundreds of Eritrean refugees. Arga Gabriel has the details.
Abraham ገብረዮሐንስ is an Eritrean citizen. He was living in Hitsats refugee camp when Eritrean troops invaded Tigray in 2020. He says he hadn't expected Eritrean forces would come to the refugee camp, but just weeks into the conflict, they had taken control of Hitsats.
حدث إنه برخا نجاري كان مسمار وصل زبالي كلاي معسكر ناي سدتني هذه أو زخونة ناي كربا خون ناي رح حيلس أو خمس إلنا ونصبينا بر.
Hitsats is far from the cities. We didn't expect that anyone would, one from inside the region or elsewhere, would come here. But suddenly Eritrean forces came and took control of the refugee camp. They were there for about 5 days. They would camp there and then go to fight Tigrayan forces.
Abraham says 10 Eritreans lost their lives during that period. One refugee committed suicide out of fear that he would be captured by Eritrean forces or forcibly returned to Eritrea.
جاء أبزي مع عسكر زي رجزني حالة بعلو رؤسو ذات فيه تشعت السمات كأ شو استقتلوا هلو مالتي
10 innocent refugees died when Eritrean forces were stationed at the refugee camp and fighting with the Tigrayan forces. One of the 10 committed suicide out of fear of being captured by Eritrean soldier. He had left the country to free himself from the Eritrean government.
According to Abraham, during their stay, Eritrean soldiers arrested refugees and looted property from the refugee camp.
حمشة معلتي أبو خصان حخلو زبنا جرجن بزحات زاد اليوم إيرتراويان حد ون تبروت أسيرة ميم.
During those 5 days, the Eritrean soldiers stole everything they needed and they selectively arrested Eritreans as well as Tigrayans that work for ARA.
Abraham's story is just one of tens of thousands of Eritrean refugees who left their homes to escape torture, arbitrary arrest, and indefinite national service just to find more trouble in their new home.
That wraps up today's news. Thank you for watching. See you next time.